Welcome to Deep Psyche. You are not here by accident. Something subtle yet undeniable within you led you to this moment. You may not fully understand it now, but by the time you reach the end, you just might. This is not another random event in your life. It is a quiet invitation from your deeper self, a gentle nudge from the soul that has been silently guiding you all along. Not with noise or urgency, but with patience. Because real transformation doesn't arrive in dramatic fashion. It doesn't come with fireworks or declarations. It unfolds quietly, almost imperceptibly, like a shift in the wind, like waking from a long sleep. This journey isn't about becoming someone else. It's about letting go of everything that never truly belonged to you. It's not about acquiring a new identity, but remembering the one that has always lived within you. True change doesn't shout, it whispers. It's the quiet realization that you no longer fit into the version of yourself you once clung to. You no longer feel at home in the same places, the same conversations, the same narratives. Carl Jung wrote that spiritual growth does not come from perfecting your personality, but from transcending it. It means loosening your grip on the ego's constructions, the defenses you built, the roles you played, and returning to the still, unwavering truth of who you are. One of the first signs of this inner shift is simple. Your past stops defining you. What once felt central to your identity begins to feel like an old film, familiar but distant. You can recall it, but you no longer need to explain it, justify it, or be shaped by it. You stop telling your story from the wound. You no longer define yourself by what hurt you, or even by what you've achieved. You begin to understand that your worth was never dependent on any of it. What happened was part of your path, but it is not who you are. And in that release, something new is born, a quiet freedom. This freedom isn't detachment, it's integration. You see the past for what it is, the past, and it no longer controls you. You don't seek validation. You don't need to be understood. You simply know. And that knowing is enough. It settles in your bones. It brings peace. The things that once triggered you no longer hold the same power. The words that once pierced you dissolve before they reach your core. You remain still, aware, unshaken. Because when the soul remembers itself, the noise fades. And in that silence, you come home. Relationships that once anchored you to outdated versions of yourself begin to loosen, not out of rejection, but because there is nothing left in you for them to hold on to. As you move beyond who you once were, the emotional hooks lose their power. Your reactions are no longer dictated by unexamined feelings, not because you suppress them, but because you've learned to see clearly, to distinguish between the present moment and the echo of old patterns. Your inner narrative softens. The thoughts that once played on repeat, crafted for survival, fade into the background. You are no longer striving for redemption, nor punishing yourself for past versions of who you were. You witness your story with new eyes and move forward, not from resistance, but from understanding. And that understanding isn't born from logic. It rises from the soul. This is where transformation begins, not in erasing the past, but in no longer needing to live from it. The old self doesn't disappear. It simply loses its center of gravity. It becomes a memory, no longer a home. You don't forget what shaped you. You simply stop building your identity upon it. Choices begin to emerge from a space within you that is freer, less tied to fear, more aligned with your essence. The roles you once played, "This is who I am, I can't change," begin to dissolve, not because you fought them, but because they no longer fit the person you are becoming. You stop acting from the need to defend or preserve a fixed identity. Because now you understand, the soul doesn't need to be named to be real. Transcendence, in the Jungian sense, is not about destroying the ego, but integrating it, honoring what it once protected, and choosing to no longer be ruled by it. You stop clinging to the persona you built to survive. You no longer distort yourself to belong to places that require you to shrink. And this letting go is not dramatic, it's gentle. You don't force it. You release without resistance. And that quiet ease is perhaps the clearest sign. You are no longer living from the conditioned self. You are beginning to live from the authentic self, from the part of you that does not need to prove, perform, or persuade. The part that simply is. And from that space, something else begins to shift. Your relationships, not because you set out to change them, but because the self that once formed them has changed. You start to meet others without the burden of expectation. You no longer seek in another what you've learned to give yourself. You no longer fear solitude nor trade pieces of yourself to avoid it. In the past, connection often came from need, from silent contracts made in pain. But now there is space, space to breathe, to witness without absorbing, to pause before reacting. This is the nature of transformation. The world doesn't change, you do. And in doing so, you stop making choices from your wounds. Your sensitivity becomes discernment. Your giving becomes whole, and that changes everything. Your relationships no longer reflect what you lack. They begin to mirror what you have integrated. You no longer reach for connection to escape solitude, nor seek conversation to avoid silence. Intimacy is no longer a distraction from yourself. It becomes a natural extension of the fullness within. This is the essence of true transformation, when you no longer strive to become someone else, but rest in the truth of who you already are. When your past ceases to define you. When your emotions no longer govern your reactions, but inform your awareness. When your story becomes a sacred thread, not a script you are still trapped inside. That is when you begin to remember your true self. And in this remembrance, there is no need for drama, no space for resentment. Even when someone does not resonate with you, it doesn't shake your ground, because your emotional equilibrium is no longer tethered to someone else's presence or approval. You no longer outsource your peace, and that shift, quiet, internal, invisible to the world, changes everything. Emotional independence is not a withdrawal from connection. It is the foundation of real connection. You stop running, you stop clinging, you begin to stand, fully consciously in the present. And for the first time, your presence becomes your offering, not a tool of negotiation, not a plea to be seen, but a language of love that is whole in itself, a quieter love, one that no longer needs to prove its worth through promises or performance. It simply is, grounded, still, real. You begin to connect from truth, not from need. You no longer shape yourself to sustain conversations that drain you or relationships that survive only on memory. Your energy becomes clear, and in that clarity, what is no longer aligned naturally falls away. Yes, it may sting, but it also brings peace. It brings you back to yourself. Your old self once chose from urgency, from the ache of abandonment, from the hunger to belong at any cost. Now you choose from stillness, from the quiet strength of your own company, because you've made peace with your silence. You've stopped fearing it. You sit with it like an old friend. And in that space, you finally see the presence of someone who cannot truly meet you can feel lonelier than being alone. So you stay with yourself, even if that means walking away from what once wore the mask of love. You no longer confuse intensity with truth. You no longer equate chaos with depth. You understand now, what brings peace is what has roots. What demands constant tension to survive is not connection, it's a performance of it. And so you stop trying to force understanding, because your soul no longer needs to be understood in order to be at peace. It only needs to be true. You no longer need to convince anyone of your growth, nor explain why you've outgrown the spaces that once confined your soul. Your presence, anchored in authenticity, speaks louder than any declaration. It carries a frequency that cannot be fabricated, and in its quiet certainty, it unsettles those who have not yet met their own depths. Some will fade away. Others may come closer, but not out of need, out of truth. And you will let both happen without resistance, because your center is no longer contingent on who stays or leaves. Now it is your center that determines what belongs. In this new inner order, only what resonates remains. Never through force, only through alignment. This shift in how you relate does not announce itself with noise. It arrives subtly, and in its wake, what once seemed indispensable begins to dissolve. Not from rejection, but from clarity. Clarity born of deep inner work, the kind that faces the shadow without flinching. You no longer need to cast your unmet needs onto others. Your old self once sought reflections to confirm its worth, temporary comforts, partial presences. But that chapter has ended. You have come to know real connection doesn't demand your essence as collateral. It doesn't ask you to abandon yourself. It invites you to embody more of who you already are. And from this renewed place, something changes. Relationships become quieter, but more alive. They are no longer measured by intensity, but by presence, by the ability to coexist in silence, without grasping, without saving, without explaining. Boundaries emerge not from fear, but from self-respect. They do not close your heart. They create coherence. They protect your time, your energy, your internal sanctity. You stop pouring yourself into what no longer evolves with you. You no longer remain out of fear of scarcity. You have moved into another frequency, one that doesn't apologize for growth. You do not ask for permission to be real, and that is the surest sign. The former self is no longer steering. Now it is your soul who chooses, and your soul does not choose based on familiarity or comfort. It chooses nourishment. It chooses what remembers you back. In this space, companionship is redefined, not as a need, but as a shared presence. You no longer seek refuge in others because you have become your own sanctuary. This is not isolation. It is maturation of the soul. You no longer carry pain that isn't yours. You no longer absorb what others refuse to heal. You see it, but you let it pass, because your energy is now devoted to what is real. You no longer fall into the unconscious compulsion to rescue those who have not yet chosen to confront their own shadow. You no longer fracture yourself into fragments, hoping that by becoming smaller, more agreeable, more invisible, you will finally be enough. For now you see clearly, authentic love is not an act of self-erasure. It is presence without possession, intimacy without imprisonment. And in that clean, unburdened space, the most meaningful human encounters begin, not as performances, but as revelations. You become a quiet catalyst for transformation, not through effort, but through integrity. Not by preaching, but by embodying coherence. Your energy, aligned and undistorted, begins to mirror to others the truths they have long avoided. Some will move closer, drawn by something they cannot name. Others may recoil, unsettled by the reflection. Yet you remain undisturbed, because your relational choices are no longer rooted in obligation or the need to maintain harmony at the cost of truth. They are born from the ground of your own becoming. And in that grounded state, you begin to see what true connection means, not the promise of permanence, but the mutual honoring of one another's unfolding. Such bonds can only arise after you have passed through your own inner crucible, after you have stood before the fragmented self, embraced its fears, its defenses, and its misguided loyalties. Not with judgment, but with deep understanding. You no longer exile your past selves. You recognize them as guardians of survival, doing what they knew in a time of unknowing. But you are no longer living in survival. You are living in creation. The massive persona fall away, not because you force them off, but because they are no longer needed. You no longer barter authenticity for acceptance. You are, and that is enough. Without the need to explain, justify, or dramatize your journey, you begin to radiate something more essential than narrative: presence. And in that unfiltered presence, intimacy shifts. It's no longer built on mutual wounding, but on mutual wholeness. You are no longer wounded by misunderstanding, no longer undone by absence, because the source of your worth is no longer external. It resides in the sacred inner union you have formed with yourself. Forged in silence, tempered in solitude, solidified in the moments when you chose not to regress into the familiar arms of your former patterns. And from that place, your old self is released, not condemned, but integrated, not rejected, but blessed and laid to rest. You no longer identify with the roles you once played. You no longer need your story to validate your presence. You are not surviving anymore. You are sculpting a new reality. And in this reality, there is no need to shout your truth. It resonates in your being. Your soul no longer seeks to impress, defend, or convert. It simply inhabits itself fully. From here, every relationship becomes a mirror, not of who you used to be, but of who you are now. And love, no longer a transaction or an escape, becomes a sacred exchange. A meeting of energies that does not entangle, but uplifts. That does not demand, but honors. That is chosen, not out of emptiness, but from wholeness. This is the essence of individuation. Not isolation, but the integration of all that you are, so that in meeting another, you do not lose yourself. You meet them as a self in truth. Your vision of life undergoes an irreversible transformation. The old filters through which you perceive the world dissolve, not by force, but by expansion. What once appeared unjust now reveals itself as necessary within the architecture of your individuation. The events you once labeled as failures or wrong turns are now seen as initiatory thresholds. Painful, yes, but essential for the deep work of transformation. You no longer speak to yourself as a victim of fate, because your consciousness has widened beyond the narrow corridors of blame. To transcend the old self is not merely to heal what was broken. It is to adopt an entirely new vantage point. Not as a means of escape, but as the natural result of soul work. The psyche, having once split to survive, now seeks wholeness. This inner elevation shifts how you interpret reality itself. What once felt chaotic now appears as symbolic. Events are no longer just occurrences, they are messages from the unconscious, encoded in the language of synchronicity and shadow. Even your perception of time evolves. You no longer inhabit the psychological tension of waiting. You do not grasp for what slips away, nor impose your will on what has yet to arrive. You begin to live in synchrony with the deep rhythm of your inner life, what Jung called the process of individuation, where the self, not the ego, becomes your true guide. In this sacred rhythm, urgency gives way to trust. The noise of external validation fades. What once seemed significant, status, comparison, approval, begins to lose its power over you. What you previously dismissed, silence, solitude, stillness, becomes hallowed. You begin to live symbolically. Each moment, no matter how small, feels part of a greater unfolding. You no longer need certainty to act. What matters is whether the act aligns with your inner truth. This becomes your compass. Your choices no longer emerge from fear or old scripts of survival. They are not reactions to unresolved wounds, but quiet affirmations of the self taking form. And this, though subtle, reshapes your entire reality. You stop demanding immediate meaning from life. You begin to understand. True insight often arises only after surrender. You no longer grip for control, you participate. And participation is not passivity, it is mature engagement with the unknown. You soften, not because you have weakened, but because your strength is now integrated. It is no longer defensive, it does not seek applause. It is the strength of one who knows who they are and no longer needs the world to reflect it back. You no longer need to display your growth. The most profound transformation speaks in silence. It is felt in your gaze, your presence, your calm and solitude. You move through the world differently now, with awareness, with reverence. The smallest details, a breath, a glance, a moment of stillness, carry meaning. You no longer measure growth by what is seen. You measure it by the peace you feel when no one is watching, by the quiet sense of integrity that greets you each morning, by the depth of your presence when the world around you rushes by. And that is the sign, not that you have escaped the world, but that you are finally in it, whole, awake, and free. Transcending the old self is not simply about shedding the identity you once clung to. It is about stepping beyond the confines of your former consciousness. It is the unfolding of your being into a new frequency, one that doesn't require you to escape your body or the world you know, but rather allows you to live from a higher plane of perception, grounded yet transcendent. The shift occurs when you stop merely reacting to life's events and begin to consciously choose how you engage with your reality. This is the essence of individuation, a deliberate alignment with the truth of your soul. From this conscious choice arises the seed of transformation, subtly altering the way you relate to every aspect of existence. What once felt like a burden now becomes an invitation to presence. What previously drained you dissolves with ease, gently, without resistance, without resentment. This transformation is not immediately visible to others, but it is profound, enduring, and powerful, an internal shift that transcends the superficial. No longer do you rely on external circumstances for your sense of peace. Your peace is no longer conditional upon things unfolding according to your desires. It is rooted in the fidelity to your own inner truth. Your alignment with this truth becomes non-negotiable. It is your anchor, your center, the guiding force in your life. In the past, the ego sought validation through achievements, through applause, through the approval of others. But this chase, this external seeking, is no longer necessary. True fulfillment does not come with noise. It arrives quietly, felt in the rhythm of your breath, the choice of your words, the dignified calm with which you walk away from what no longer serves your soul, without creating conflict or harm. Challenges, once perceived as obstacles or punishments, are now understood as thresholds, necessary gateways for the soul's growth. These moments no longer induce fear or resistance. They are welcomed as opportunities for revelation, unveiling dormant parts of your being, beckoning you to step deeper into your authentic self. You no longer run from the difficulties of life. Instead, you meet them with the knowing that they are not here to break you, but to reveal you. And this shift in perspective alters your energy at the most fundamental level. Your vibration no longer emanates from fear or doubt, but from truth, a truth that needs no defense, one that speaks for itself in your presence, in your stillness. In this clarity, you realize that the deepest transformation was never about changing your external circumstances. The true transformation occurred within you. You no longer see life through the lens of a fragmented self in need of healing. Instead, you view the world through the eyes of an awakened soul, whole, integrated, and at peace. From this place of awakening, even the ordinary becomes sacred, not because the world has changed, but because your perception has shifted. The absence of fear and lack transforms the way you see everything. Your gaze softens and expands. Gratitude replaces longing. You no longer need divine signs or certainty to move forward. You begin to walk at the rhythm of your soul, not because you've slowed down, but because you are no longer chasing what was never meant for you. The frantic search for external validation gives way to the quiet trust that life is unfolding as it should. You allow space for mystery, for the unknown, because you now trust that life works with you, not against you. In that sacred space of surrender, everything begins to align, not through more effort, but through less resistance. Your vibration becomes magnetic, drawing in only what is in harmony with your essence. What is meant for you stays, and what is not fades away naturally, peacefully, without drama. Even the difficulties that remain no longer hold the power to shatter you. You now meet them with a depth of understanding that doesn't demand immediate answers, but seeks alignment in truth. You are no longer driven by urgency, but by presence. This shift is not about striving to become someone. It is about embodying who you truly are. And in that embodiment, change occurs, not dramatically, but deeply and completely. This change, while invisible to others, transforms everything. When your energy aligns with your truth, your reality responds in kind. There is no chaos, no struggle, only synchronicity, only clarity. There is a quiet inner whisper that no longer needs words. It is the voice of the soul, reminding you of what you have always known. You are no longer the person you once were. You have transcended the old self, and this transcendence does not announce itself with fanfare. It is felt in silence, recognized only in the depth of your presence. There is no singular moment of arrival, no marked point when it all clicks. One day you simply notice that you no longer react in the same way. You have integrated what was once fragmented. You are whole. Thank you for joining me on this journey of self-discovery and transformation. Remember, true growth comes from within, and when you align with your authentic self, everything around you will follow suit. If you found value in this message, don't forget to subscribe for more insights on living a life of purpose and inner peace.